I appreciate everybody showing up today. Today, we're going to be talking about marijuana lounges in Washington State. We are with the Cannabis Alliance. This is the committee to overturn a Class C felony on marijuana lounges. The Cannabis Alliance is a lobbyist group in Seattle for producers, processors, retailers, ancillary businesses. And our committee is trying to not only overturn the felony on cannabis lounges, but also implement a bill to allow to run and operate a cannabis lounge. So marijuana lounges, as a quick background, in June of 2015, House Bill 2136 made it a Class C felony to operate and maintain a marijuana lounge. And so since then, it's been virtually impossible for a private club or otherwise to operate. There is no loophole, there is no workaround. And so this committee has been working diligently since March, every other week, to meet twice a month to go over state and local bills. So within that list, we've already gone over Alaska, New Jersey, Colorado, California, including West Hollywood, Las Vegas, Oregon. And so today we're going to be talking about Illinois in just a little bit. So just briefly, our panelists are members of the Cannabis Cafe Committee to overturn this felony. So from my left to right is Devin with Weed Maps, and then we have Levi of Lions Pride. There's Matt of High End Farms, Bailey representing Normal, and Dawn, who's representing a lot of things, but I mean,
well, experience from operating social club.
Absolutely. He's got experience at the Northwest Cannabis Club in Portland that we visited last week when we reviewed the Northwest Cannabis Club. And the bill for Oregon, which was interesting because they included special use and tours. So it's very important, and we'll kind of get into that in a moment as it pertains to Washington State. So Washington State's vertically integration has had some limitations, including investment opportunities. Washington State has limitations on out-of-state investors. And so when you're forced to either pick on the producer-processor side or the retailer side, not allowing full integration, that pretty much passed Washington State for a lot of investment opportunities. And then to couple that compounded issue with the vertical integration and limitations on out-of-state investors, it's been really hard on small business growth and success. So panelists, I'd like to ask, we'll start with Devin. How could cannabis lounges help small business owners as well as the members and the cannabis community they serve?
Speaking of small businesses, we are in one giving a shout out to the Green Lighting shop here in Olympia. They're hosting us. This is a fantastic small business that I think really is looking way out in the future with what they already have here operating, and that is a dispensary storefront and connected to a coffee shop that is evolving into much more of that event space. Really, the benefit to small businesses, I think there can be so many ways that we can get creative. Just being here today, we're discussing about a few other ones, but I just think that this would give another avenue, in our space to get creative and have social use in a setting that could be a little bit unique to other establishments, but small businesses I think would highly benefit from this overturn, and I don't want to take too much because I'm sure there's a lot to go on, but I'm going to pass the mic to Levi there.
All right. Great.
So again, panelists, how could cannabis lounges help small business owners as well as the members and the communities they serve?
I guess just speaking from a HempFest point of view, right? I'm very active with the HempFest community, entertainment director of the HempFest. I've seen the festival go on for 15 years in my own eyes, and I see hundreds of vendors that come out to our festival each year that benefit from a community that all support our community, our hundreds of businesses that support the cannabis industry. As an event producer, to rent a hall or have groups of businesses and people that I'm associated with come out to an event, and to maybe get a banquet license, to be able to apply for a banquet license to come out and gather together and get some tax revenue and of course just buy products and support local businesses. That's important to me. So I think that's a great example. The Hemp Fest is a great example of just being wearing that event producer hat and have hundreds of vendors come out and build a community of local business. I think even also having just the consumption lounges where local Lyft and Uber drivers, right? I mean, those are small business owners, having them be able to have more places to pick up and more pick up and drop off spots, things like that. Those are great examples that are going to help drive the business.
Matt, anything to add?
Yeah, with a lot of what Levi was saying too, to give a lot of opportunity for entertainment to have a lot more facets on different genres of type of people coming out, old and young, experiencing the same type of concepts of positivity that's a form of art and creativity. There's a lot of negative thoughts with our government towards the way that we consume our product, and the more that we get out here and show everybody how peaceful cannabis can really be, it's just going to open up a lot more opportunities for small business, for government, and for medical patients to consume.
Bailey, how can cannabis lounges help small business owners as well as the members in the community they serve?
Cannabis is a naturally sociable drug. You want to see your friends. You want to make new friends. The market needs to acknowledge that, because it's like traditional cannabis use, which was criminalized. It was going to happen anyway. Criminalization was society's attempt to respond to that, and it didn't work well. Similarly, criminalization of social use is a way to hinder a culture of responsible consumption and to hinder the notion that people can get together and use the drug and have it be a pleasant event and not a community threat. So I think this is a crucial policy for fostering a culture of responsibility. It's crucial for businesses because it's a segment of the market that's not being met now, either in the form of people already in a community who use cannabis, or in the case of cannabis tourism, which sure seems to be happening everywhere else except for Washington, except for maybe Seattle Hemp Fest is one of the key events. But generally there's no allowance for event permitting. There's no allowance for the lounges that we've been talking about. And this is a problem that's compounded socially. That means the poorer you are, the less options you have to consume cannabis. If you're a rich person, you're always going to have a house, you're always going to have a business that'll look the other way, you always have friends who will travel with you and might enjoy that as well. But the poorer you are, the less options you have. You may not be able to consume in public housing, you may not be able to consume in apartments based on rental or lease agreements, and you certainly can't consume anywhere outside in any of our lovely parks. So what this creates is a culture where marijuana consumption is seen as a nuisance item by default. And this serves the purposes of some people who don't like cannabis, but it really does nothing to serve the responsible consuming community, to say nothing of making them more responsible and safer and happier in the future.
Don, what's your 2 cents?
Well, I agree with everything that's been said here so far, and I've got to say that the felony on consumption club participation goes against the whole premise of reform. Consumption is the natural result of purchasing, whether you do it alone or in groups. And group consumption has always been, as has been mentioned, a social event. And to have the social club would open up a new opportunity for a different kind of license. When you look at the business format of most retail licensees, it's an in and out thing. But particularly in developed areas like, we'll say, Seattle downtown area, parking is at a premium, and those businesses really do want people to come in and get out and make room for the next person. But in a social consumption lounge, people might be there anywhere from 20 minutes, half an hour, to literally a couple of hours or more, depending on what is going on. And this is not really the reefer madness thing of someone sitting in a closet with their doobie giggling. You want to have a space similar to what we have now. It's clean, it's comfortable, it's well staffed, and most of the club activity that we've experienced being open 7 days a week in Portland it's event driven, and people want to have something more than just a place to come and sit down and smoke or vape or dab. They want to be entertained, they want to hear bands, they want to go to events, and this could present an opportunity for the licensees that do want people to get in and out to sponsor events where their products could be featured, to build their brand, and it would be just a great thing. So we definitely should be moving towards social consumption lounges. As Bailey mentioned, a lot of people do not have space to consume. And with the ban on clubs, this pushes people outdoors and in the face of non-consumers and possibly young people. And having a space gives people comfort inside, with like-minded people and out of the public eye.
So there are some members of the House and Senate that are here as well as listening online, and they may feel apprehensive to sign off on a bill allowing smoking and consumption, either due to their conservative beliefs or maybe concerns on impaired driving. And yet we've seen data from several states debunking increased accidents in newly formed cannabis states. So Levi, I'm going to start with you and your experience dealing with impaired clientele. Have you seen an uptick anywhere with legal cannabis as it pertains to accidents from impaired driving on cannabis?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm definitely excited to talk a little bit about that. Just being out as an event producer, we own 6 private vehicles that we're out, we're providing safe access for people to essentially participate and smoke, and I don't think that there's an increase, and I think people are very conscious of what they do smoke and how much they can smoke. But I would say definitely there's a huge lack of education just on how much I can smoke and safely drive with all the just the new scare tactics maybe that there is out there. I personally, I'm in this industry, and I'm meeting thousands of people that are consuming, and I don't think that there's any education out there as far as how much can I smoke one joint? Do I have to wait an hour before I can drive? There's a total lack of education on what the policy should be, and there needs to be more education out there for that. And then of course there's the side of a medical patient and maybe a new consumer. Maybe I'm trying cannabis for my first time. My tolerance and just my experience of smoking, there's going to be there's not going to be anything to go off of, right? So again, how much can I smoke and then go just interact out in public? Can I safely walk across the street? I don't know. There's medical patient's going to be able to smoke a bunch, and just personally, there's a couple people I won't even step into a vehicle for unless they're stoned, right? It's like some radical drivers out there, and if I don't even feel getting into a vehicle with somebody that's in the right mindset, or safely able to drive. So there's 2 sides of it there that I think there just needs to be a lot more education.
Anybody else on the panel have experience dealing with impaired clientele, or have you seen or want to talk about any upticks anywhere with impaired driving?
Well, I-502 had a couple of effects on the impaired driving scene because it also changed the way that law enforcement engages in those stops and reports those stops. Whereas previously there was sometimes just an effort to say there's an impaired driver, there's going to be a blood draw or a drug test. Now there's more of an effort to specifically say, was this a cannabis, was this a draw for cannabis, or was the stop assuming impairment from that? So it kind of cuts an interesting, sensational way for the media where they want to go, oh my gosh, you know, there was this horrible crash in Colorado, there was a very devastating highway crash and the person had marijuana in their systems, but they're also 2 to 3 times the legal alcohol limit. And I think one of the things that we need to combat, and that cannabis lounges could combat if they were enacted, is multi-drug use. People who drink and do pills, people who smoke pot and drink, people who dab and do pills. Combining these drugs combines their effects almost always to the point of inebriation. So I think one of the things lounges can do is create spaces where it's more acceptable to use cannabis, but you're not going to be doing ecstasy. You're not going to be drinking to excess. In Amsterdam, they originally allowed some of these coffee shops to have both alcohol and cannabis sales on the same site. They found that was leading to people who were really, what's the phrase, riggedy wrecked? But seriously, it was tourists who came to Amsterdam who had no expectation or familiarity with what responsible cannabis use looks like, and saw that city as just carte blanche to do whatever they wanted. I don't know what the rules are, therefore there must not be any. And that's an attitude that I think is fostered around driving to the degree that there's no, you know, people are getting together and consuming cannabis, but are there designated drivers? Like was mentioned, is their ability to call ride share or just a taxi service. And so in this year I got our first social cannabis use bill introduced in the House, House Bill 1945. And it included both restrictions on the amount that these stores could sell, on enabling, or not enabling, but catering to designated drivers as well by having non-infused food and drinks available to them, by expecting the business to be able to put people in communication with rideshare programs. There are all sorts of things that stores can do that fosters responsible behavior and avoids impaired driving. But we just don't think of it that way because we're so used to assuming that cannabis consumption means someone's going to behave reckless in every other way.
I can follow up on that. Relating back to the club experience in Portland, that club has now been open for 5 years. And I can tell you that in that 5 years, we have had no fights in the club. We've had 0 DUIs leaving the club and 0 calls to law enforcement for any reason. In a club atmosphere and system, you have to check in at the door. You don't just come in and grab a seat. So you do have a face-to-face interaction with someone at the door. And being close to someone across the counter to check an ID and check a club membership, or to initiate someone into the club with a membership. There's been often times when we've smelled alcohol on someone and we've refused them admittance. Particularly in these nascent stages of, developing clubs and the concerns about mixing substances or alcohol and cannabis interactions. We want to be cautious not to have society and in particular law enforcement saying, well, this person had been drinking but they've been smoking cannabis, so obviously cannabis was the problem. That's relating back to a prohibitionist thinking mindset. But if you can preclude that from happening when you get in the door, you can follow that up. Cannabis consumers are not like drinkers. The club typically closes at 12, and not just because it's late and we're tired. It's probably because most of the people have gone home by then. You know, people come out. Why do you come out? Well, quite honestly, I have a home I can consume in, but I don't want to smoke around my kids. So this is an opportunity for me and my wife to come out and, you know, socialize with others. Bailey touched on a good point in that new consumers, and until reform becomes nationwide and more international, legal states and cities that have social clubs are a draw to travelers. They want to come and experience it, and they don't know anything. They know that they have to go to a store and buy it. And in talking to our members that are business related, that's the next question they ask is, well, now I have my weed, where can I go smoke it? And if you're not in a club area, then the answer is do it on the down low, or, you know, hide. And that's really not the environment we're trying to foster. So, you know, it's important to consider all of these things. And the most important thing is to move past the fear that we've had. I mean, I know about the concern about DUI, but a lot of people forget that prohibition has been in for over 80 years. And it's not like people quit smoking. People have been smoking and driving for all of that time. And it's only now that it's legal that they've created a focus on it. So, I mean, no one wants to be behind the wheel or on the road with anyone who is impaired. But if they're not impaired and we don't know where that level is, I know it's certainly not at 5 nanograms consistently across the population in the manner that 0.08 is for alcohol. But, you know, that's a separate issue. But when you have new people coming into a club situation, they're not alone. They're not going to be so ignorant as to overconsume when they have other people there around them saying, whoa, hey, you might want to go easy there. So I think that those are some top concerns that I would bring up.
Thanks, Don.
So I started the Seattle Super Chronic Cafe as a concept 5 years ago for a friend of mine that was dying of multiple sclerosis. He's since passed away. He was in an adult care facility. So as Bailey mentioned, that there's not an opportunity for low-income housing, people who don't own homes, people who can't smoke outside. And as someone who lived in an adult care facility, it was very difficult for me to watch this individual get lifted out of his bed with what looked like an engine hoist, only to go outside and be so close to a high school that he would have been, ticketed again for public consumption, which only compounded the issue. Giving an adult a place to consume in a safe place is, I think, essential to our own, well-being, if you will. And so to create this safe place to consume, beyond Pete Holmes's quest for tourism, we need a safe access point for medical patients. So my question to the panel is, how do you foresee the impact on the medical community where it seems that they've been left behind in a world of recreation?
As far as the medical community goes, I think there'd be a huge benefit to them, and feel that they're the ones that should probably benefit the most, being that they've kind of paid a heavy price until now, or even moving forward. Things like maybe free memberships. A lot of these medical patients have similar issues and conditions, and that's a place where they can go and release and socialize maybe on those subjects, or just feel like they have a place to go and really socialize. I think if it was my decision, I would definitely make that safe access zone extremely beneficial to medical patients because of the price that they've paid till now, and that would be just another place for them to go and just really feel like they can be around family and people of similar backgrounds.
He's created the opportunity for community, and that community can serve, you know, a tourist base or it can serve a medical patient base. And there can be other group activities, there can be, you know, counseling, there can be all sorts of medical opportunities that it's worth noting. Socialization generally helps health. People need relationships, and they need relationships beyond computer screens. So I think if clubs choose to cater to medical patients, it both gives more opportunities to, again, the poorer sector patients who may have fewer consumption opportunities, but it also generally fosters health of community and friendship and civic engagement.
Well, I think we need to take into account that medical consumption is different than social consumption. The practices of each group are somewhat different. But I would have to say it's not a matter of either or, it's more of an and. And bringing those two groups together, although I can say that at the club we do have a front table, then it's all patients. They've kind of camped out there, and that's where they hang out. They do socialize with other people, and it's led to a greater understanding both between people that are non-patients about medical and its place in consumption, and a tolerance on the part of patients of people that previously were thought to, well, they just want to get high and I want to be well. But it was famously said, at some point, all use is medical. So having that opportunity to mix those groups, as Billy said, does lead to more understanding not only between patients and consumers individually, but all together.
Thank you, Tom. So the last industry I worked in was apartment maintenance, and I worked in some Section 8 and some government funded. And because government funded, you had to be at least 60 years old or older to live there. A lot of these people complained about how they couldn't utilize cannabis and how they knew that the pain that they had, they would much rather utilize cannabis than opioids. But since they were government funded, and if they smoked cannabis, they would lose the government funding and get put out on the street. And so these are people that wanted to live a better, healthy life, but yet they couldn't because they were forced not to not be able to consume because they had nowhere to consume that at. So they're forced to use opioids.
And this last question before we open the floor to Q&A is about social equity programs. We want to reduce the barrier to entry for individuals and communities most adversely impacted by the enforcement of cannabis-related laws, you know, the war on drugs. But my experience with SBA loans or small business association loans for minorities has not been optimistic. I've been in banking, retail, commercial, worked for stockbrokers, but during my time in banking, I didn't see small business association loans work for minorities at all. So I'm not optimistic with giving grants or just applications. I believe that it should be more about priorities and free licensing and not an application status similar to what you see in a failed SBA minority program. So question to the panel, do you think a social equity program will actually benefit those it's intended to help?
Being a minority, I'm going to just keep it short and sweet, and that is, yes, I think it would be very beneficial, and I hope that it would be, something that would be heavily considered for this moving forward, the industry as a whole, consumption lounges, just, across the whole industry in this whole country. Yeah, I sure hope so. As I understand, the city of Portland actually committed some of their marijuana revenues to an equity program that was managed by an organization called Prosper Portland. And they've had some successes, but I'd say one of the key things for making an equity program work is money. And people don't like that. People like free things. But the reality is we've invested a lot
destroying certain communities, communities of color, and poorer communities based on disproportionate cannabis enforcement. We should try to offer disproportionate opportunity to some of those communities as well in this new cannabis market. So I would say we absolutely need that. It absolutely can work, but it will only work if cities or if the state commits to funding.
When we look at the regulated system as it exists in Washington State right now, I don't see anything on the horizon where they're going to be increasing the amount of licenses, and that leads to the reality that there's really not going to be any future huge opportunity for equity as we're discussing. However, if we do create a new club license, that represents a huge opportunity for everyone and for equity, and it doesn't have to be seen as competitive with the retail market. In my dream world of a club, you could either, since we're going into socialize, particularly in Colorado and in Oregon, they do have home grow. We're working on home grow here in Washington. So people in the Portland Club are welcome to bring in their own. The Portland Club does not retail any cannabis products. But if you think of a club as a hub served by the surrounding retail businesses, it not only gives people a place to go after they've purchased, but it gives each of those surrounding businesses the opportunity to be a sponsoring business where their products could be featured, and not in terms of ounces or larger amounts, but if you think of the club as a bar model, it would be nice to come in and purchase a half a gram or a gram in order to try different things. I mean, think about going out for a flight of beers. You're trying something new. There's 3 or 4 or 5 different flavors you're trying just a sample. The same could be done for bud. The same could be done for dabs. When we had the Northwest Cannabis markets up in Seattle, that was a patient market, and we did have a consumption room there, and vendors would give out a small amount for tasting, and people could actually compare Blue Dream, Blue Dream, Blue Dream, Blue Dream, Blue Dream, and Blue Dream, all of it from a different grower, and then go, that's the Blue Dream I want, and then go make their purchase. So if the social club would have the opportunity to sample those things out for a charge, but not be selling weight, that would be a good symbiotic relationship between the retail licensees and the club model.
So that concludes the panel session before we move into today's topic on Illinois, quite the bill. They've got a good social equity program. Apparently there is a social use or marijuana lounge verbiage in here somewhere. But before we move on to this, I just want to conclude today's panel with a Q&A and see if there's anything that we've left out. Obviously, we haven't talked about the Cannabis Lounge specifics at all. Don did just mention on-site sales, which will not be a part of this bill. Bailey did introduce that in his bill. It received a lot of headwinds, if you will. We're going to leave it out. We're going to make it very streamlined, very simple. It's going to make it difficult from a revenue standpoint on how to generate revenue with this model. It's going to be essential to have advertising. So the LCB is going to have to work with us on that in order to keep this business open. And so definitely keeping it streamlined and thin. But with that, I want to open up the floor to any questions specifically to Washington State, or as a matter of fact, any of the 8 state bills that we've reviewed.
Well, I looked a little bit at the Illinois cafe bill. It's part of an enormous legalization package, and Illinois was actually the first state to legalize a market through their legislature. Vermont had legalized possession and personal grow of cannabis, but no state legislature had ever actually enacted the store and retail and production model through their legislature. It had always been done at the ballot box. So this is a really good sea change, and there were some things that were missed, particularly home growing, which was in there and then was out. But as far as the cafes go, they're creating a specific exemption to their Indoor Smoking Act. And that has been a really huge obstacle in talking about that here in Washington. In fact, the cannabis bill I mentioned, the sponsor, Steve Kirby, was a very nice gentleman. But as he signed on to sponsor that bill, he told me something. He said the Democratic Party of Washington State will never, ever, ever, his words, change the state's Indoor Smoking Act. That is a huge barrier to ever having these types of clubs. You could have edibles, might even be able to have vapor, but you could never have a traditional joint and smoking lounge until we adapt Washington's Indoor Smoking Act. And I think we ought to, because I think adults can be trusted to know what they're exposing their body to and what they're getting into when they choose to visit a venue like that. So that's a key change that Illinois had in their bill, and it's one we're absolutely going to need here in Washington. They also are opening to the possibility of marijuana consumption in certain movie theaters. I am a huge movie nerd. I want that so bad. If they give me a law allowing marijuana movie theaters, I honestly could be tricked into giving up all the other lounge options. I like it that much. It's a chill way to see The Big Lebowski. Anyway, so that was my main thought on Illinois. Anyone else?
Yeah, actually, I'll follow up on that. Only about a few months after we opened in Portland, Oregon did put in their Indoor Clean Air Act. And as a result of that, we were forced to section off the parking lot and create an outdoor smoking area. Up until that time, people that wanted to smoke tobacco had to go out the back door, and it's like you see everywhere. They stand and shiver in the rain while trying to have a smoke. But when the Indoor Clean Air Act passed, we had to adjust, and we created a 1,600 square foot area where you can smoke whatever you want outside. The owner was a cigarette smoker. Our art director was a cigar smoker, and I like my pipe. So the three of us would have an opportunity to take a break and still smoke outside. And as we look at moving forward, we're 5 years in, or going on 6 years in to reform, and it's important as we develop new opportunities around social equity to create a new license, or even just to allow private clubs that don't, the private club that doesn't sell any products is not subject to OLCC regulation in Oregon. So
that's equivalent to LCB.
That's Oregon's equivalent of LCB. So I've had conversations with the board and staff at LCB, and alcohol is their historical strong point. They are learning the things that we've all known for years. And it's a matter of bringing them along and spoon feeding them and getting them to see the light. But this is a tremendous opportunity, and I can't see how they can avoid it moving forward into the future. We have to end the felony and create the opportunity. And as you said, without having retail opportunities in a club situation, you really limit the profitability of those clubs.
Yeah, just putting an emphasis on having to remove that felony in order to create the private club model. That model can't exist without removing the Class C felony. Once that felony is removed, you can create a private club, which you can then be exempt from the state's Clean Indoor Air Act. And the states that we've seen exempt themselves from that with a stroke of a pen has been Colorado and New Jersey and a couple other states that I'm forgetting. But it's just, it's that easy. And what Dawn did outside to create an atmosphere and environment is really easy to do in Washington State as well. And so we have about 5 minutes before we're going to dive into the Illinois bill with the rest of the committee members. We're going to do that online with those that couldn't make it. And so, again, this just kind of gives us about 5 more minutes to do kind of a quick Q&A. If there are questions, we can dive into some interesting bills that we've seen, like Alaska, I thought was really well written and used as the base for Washington State's bill. I mentioned that Colorado and New Jersey exempt themselves from the Clean Indoor Air Act. That was nice. But the sales that we saw that Dawn mentioned in Las Vegas caused them to lose their opportunity to have a consumption lounge for 2 years. So it's been postponed in Las Vegas because they wanted to have alcohol, because they wanted to have all of these things. Compounding that problem, creating that issue of on-site sales is not the way to get things passed when people have their own ideas and agendas and compounding those issues. So keeping it slim, keeping it focused and to the point of just allowing a safe access point to help small businesses grow, to help the medical community, and to create a social equity program for those affected by the war on drugs. That's really what we want to do. It's kind of where we need to go. This state has been really, really hurt by the laws that have been implemented. The restrictions from out-of-state investors and the lack of capital have made us struggle. I think Washington State is the worst state to do business in. I've seen many investors leave because of the vertical integration and our lack thereof, the opportunities, the strict controls on consumption lounges. It doesn't make for a very good opportunity for small businesses. That needs to change, and that can change. With the port in Seattle helping us with tourism and Hemp Fest and some of these corporate conglomerates trying to stop that is too much. We need to kind of take back our own community, and it really kind of starts with cannabis lounges. I feel that it's almost a window into the soul of the community where you can see it. That's the culture, that's where the vibrancy, that's where everything happens. And once you can visualize that, then it's normal. Then you can kind of see how calm and easy it is, and the fact that people are going home at midnight because it's time to go home. And there are no issues, there are no problems, there are no excessive, driving impairment problems from every emerging state. It's consistent. There's more than 3 states that are legal. So you can see trends, you can see anomalies, and there is a trend of state driving, of good access points, and obviously revenue. Let's not be kidding ourselves. This is really about revenue. We can talk about patience, and that's really important, but I don't think that we're going to change people's minds unless we show them where the revenue opportunity is. We're going to see a correction in the economy. It's happening, and if you don't see it, you're not paying attention. But there's going to be a correction in the economy. There's going to be a downturn in housing prices. There's going to be a correction in the economy, whether it's bonds or equities or otherwise. It's happening, and you need that revenue. So substitute that revenue that you got accustomed to with housing, with this crazy bubble, and take that revenue if that's all you care about. This is about patience. This is about small business. This is about doing right against those that have been done wrong for social community or for social access and minorities. So this is a bigger play than just tourism, much bigger play, whether it's finance that you care about or ultimately the social equity and those that have done wrong with this crazy justice system. It's time to do right. And that movement is with a marijuana lounge. And the first step with that is overturning that Class C felony. First things first. So with that, we're going to jump into Illinois unless we have any last questions, last comments, please.
Bailey, you had talked about House Bill 1945, which I know you've really championed, and I'm curious to know what the current status on that is. You mentioned some of the barriers that it's currently facing. Is there still a glimmer of hope for that bill to become passed as it stands? And then as kind of a follow-up for the whole panel, what can the average Washington citizen do to encourage the passage of legislation like that or something similar that maybe aren't specifically connected?
Great question, thank you.
Bill 1945 can still be enacted. Washington functions on what are called bienniums, which is a 2-year legislative period. That said, bills that are introduced in the first part of the session, it's very rare that they're then taken up during the second shorter session, which is what we're heading towards. It's a 60-day period. So there's not a lot of time, and I will say to its benefit and its troubles, 1945 was a very long bill. And I put everything in there to try to get as much support from the community and give as much options to the legislature. And I was clear with everyone that if they only wanted to look at certain parts of the bill, event permitting or one type of lounge, that I thought that was okay, and I would settle for that. And you're not supposed to tell legislators what you'll settle for, but I did it anyway. So it's possible that bill could still move. In likelihood, we're looking at maybe a couple smaller bills through this project that will probably be more narrow in scope than 1945 was. And on the other note, I would encourage everyone to check out Seattle Hemp Fest. That's hempfest.org. They have a new Advocacy in Washington State page. And I know because I wrote it. I helped update their original Contacting State Legislature page, and we added a lot of new bells and whistles about making public comments at LCB meetings, about getting into a bill page for a specific bill and what to look at and what information was included there, and just other methods for reaching out to state lawmakers and members of Congress. And I would encourage people to check out hempfest.org. If they can't come to the protestable, and I sure hope they can here in a few weeks, check out Advocacy in Washington State, because that's really just going to be a good introduction for whatever people want to advocate around a lounge or anything else regarding cannabis.
I got you. I've got to tell you that the most important thing that an individual can do is talk to your own legislators. And we have to realize that they come out of their personal experience and community, and cannabis may not be their thing. So we think about lobbyists as being a bad thing, but not all lobbyists are paid. And lobbyist just means that you are knowledgeable about the subject and you want to offer input or advice or consultation to your legislator that does not know about that. So the more voices that legislators hear in support of reform, be it lounges or home grow or any other completely unrelated to cannabis subject, is get involved. If you Google Washington District Finder, you can put in your address or zip code in there. It will tell you who your two state representatives and your senators are. It'll give you the contact information for their offices. And your first contact will be with the elected's legislative assistant, and I got to tell you, those people are honest, they're not politicians, and they're more likely to give you a straight answer than the legislator will. But ask for a 15-minute meeting. If you can get a 15-minute meeting, if you ask for a 15-minute meeting, they'll take you seriously that you're not going to waste their time. And then when you get that meeting, go and prepare. Know what you want to say, know what you want to ask for, and offer a solution. I came out of high-rise construction work, which is the workers, goes on to the supervisors, goes on to management, and all of that. And when you run into a problem in the field, you are much easier to solve it faster if the first thing you do is determine a solution and take it to your foreman and say, look, here's the problem. Here's what I think can be done to fix it. And when you do that, you give them an easy way out. They don't have to think too hard. All they have to do is look at the problem the way you've described it, look at the solution and see if it fits, send it up the chain, down the chain, and then everybody's back at work. but absolutely get involved. I mean, before I was active, I was always surprised that I would hear something pass the news and say, how come I never heard about that? So, and then beyond that, I gotta say, you don't have to go to Portland. Just down the street here is Friends of Frankie's. It was what I know to be Washington's first and only still surviving consumption lounge. When the Clean Air Act came in 2008, you couldn't smoke cigarettes. Frankie created a space upstairs, and it complied with the distance rules for smoke. And when cannabis went legal, Frankie said, smoke is smoke as far as I'm concerned. Unfortunately, we lost Frankie last year, and his widow has indicated that she has other concerns, and I believe the club will close sometime in not too far distant future. So if we want to have consumption lounges not only in Olympia but statewide, talk to your legislators.
All right. Any last questions before we jump into this Illinois bill?
I'll do one quick one.
Yeah.
Has there been any thought to taking like an incremental policy approach to just providing social consumption for medical patients as a starting place, or are you looking for a comprehensive bill? Like, would that have any traction?
I would imagine the costs involved with setting up a facility for cannabis consumption, you need a pretty specific patient community that you said, yes, these people are going to be involved. And that might happen in Seattle, perhaps Tacoma or Spokane. But that's a pretty narrow, and I understand that's kind of what's being asked. It's possible, but I think to have it be a model that's one worth emulating, to say nothing of one that can be used for non-patients, there would be some costs in setting up a venue like that and getting the approval, because at this point I think it would still need a state approval of some kind, or they could be charged under state law. Even if, like, Seattle Hemp Fest, not exactly compliant with state law, the city of Seattle has indicated that for their staff and for their purposes they'll accept it if it meets certain conditions. And that's fine for me, but I think the state would expect some structure that they were aware of or had approved of and was not just done by a county.
And to throw in on that, it is about the economics. Well, that's one part of it. The other part is we know there's already a division between retail consumers and the patient community. For those that don't know, medical still is in a gray area of law. It is not legal. You can still be arrested, you can still be prosecuted, you can still have your property seized. And to have those two groups come together as a benefit, to have the totality of those two groups as consumer potential for your club would be very important in making the club economically viable.
I think there would be interest in a more narrow pilot program, whether it's centered around patients or a specific jurisdiction accommodating these kinds of venues.
A pilot program would be a good thing. I'll fly.
Get the foot in the door.
All right. So we don't have a lot of time, about 20 minutes to dive into this bill for Illinois. I guess we'll just start on the social equity part and then move into the consumption. I found that the Cannabis Development Fund was interesting. They want to put aside some money to create a Cannabis Development Fund. And I'm wondering with the committee, how you guys feel about that versus just offering discounts. I'm not sure that I want to give a regulatory authority access to a multi-million-dollar fund for misappropriation or any issues. I'd rather just create a discount program for social equity participants. Is there opinions on the board or in the audience?
Sure. Well, actually, all businesses in most states do have programs for women and minority-owned businesses. Just to spitball something out there, if you look at the population demographics by race and gender, maybe that's a starting place. Washington and, as far as I know, Colorado, the businesses are pretty much populated by white folk, be they male or female. So to have a carve out of opportunities would draw more investment capital to each of those groups. If you can only have X percentage of the market available, and some of that is reserved for minorities or women, those groups are going to get interest that they might not normally get if those carve-outs are not made.
We do have a state agency that's dedicated to women and minority business entrepreneurship, but it has nothing that's particularly centered on cannabis. It has some ancillary things that might benefit that. We would obviously need a program that is forward, cannabis forward in its focus. But one idea that has been thrown out due to the limited number of licenses that would be left, and the reality that those licenses don't always correspond to places that want more cannabis business or want more cannabis tourism, is an idea of allowing communities that invest in equity programs, that put up money for it, to get more leeway in how many cannabis businesses they have and what type of businesses those are. It's essentially a chance for the neighborhoods and communities with enough demographic interest in fostering more minority business, more women-owned businesses, or even veteran-owned businesses, to allow them to put their money where their mouth is, essentially, and support that within their communities, and then get more control or more leeway in how that jurisdiction can have, how many businesses they can have, and how they choose to allocate them or manage them. So that's one idea that I think the money aspect remains important in equity, and that's one way to try to address it.
So let me add one other thing on top of that. Asking again if Cannabis Development Fund is the appropriate thing to do to create this big fund, to have somebody manage the fund, or just offer simple discounts. Asking that question along with, is it even reasonable to have a social equity program that has a vesting period of 5 years? This industry moves fast. So to be a social equity applicant, you need to have 10% ownership and make $750,000 or less the previous year, and be in business for 5 years. So if you don't have that person with you for an entire 5 years at that vesting period, then you have to repay all of it back, probably with interest. So is that even feasible, 5 years? I mean, this industry, again, moves quick.
I gotta say that you asked an interesting question as to administration. I don't think the state really has the experience to develop the cannabis industry. The experience that exists within the industry and outside of it in people that didn't get a chance to participate is a wealth of knowledge and experience that should be tapped. I would think that an industry fund, an industry supported fund, an administered fund could better develop that than the state or the LCB could do.
And I also think there's interest in looking for businesses that don't have a minority ownership, that don't meet a threshold of, yes, there's a person of color who owns 10% of the business. I think we're interested in perhaps new businesses, but businesses that are majority owned by someone of color, by community of color, by women entrepreneurs, So I would say that's an avenue more for funding new business startup versus, like you're saying, looking at one where you need a 5-year track record of including a woman or a racial minority in your ownership.
And then for the cannabis lounge or the marijuana lounge specifically, this is a 611-page bill. I went through every single page, and I didn't see anything in there specifically about cannabis cafes or marijuana lounges. And so I'm having a difficult time talking about Illinois as it pertains to the lounges. Bailey, did you find anything in here about cannabis lounges?
Short answer is I think near the end I could have sworn there was some talk about I don't know if it uses the phrase lounge. That would be one thing.
It doesn't use the words lounge, consumption, social use, venue. Every key word I tried to find, none of it came up, which is why flipping through 611 pages didn't help either.
No.
And so I'm just wondering if the board was able to find anything and what they came up with, because I am empty-handed.
No, I just searched the PDF of the document. I found consumption in there a lot, but it was usually talking about consumption of the product. Well, yeah, and about what it will just generally being no longer a criminal act to consume it. But my understanding is the full bill doesn't go into effect until the beginning of 2020, and that even at that point, similar to Washington, there are specific rules that they haven't negotiated. So my belief is they did change the Indoor Smoking Act. That was an exemption that was created, but that's my understanding.
I did not find anything, but I think something important to remember is this is a young industry that's developing, and even as laws are passed, they get changed, they get tweaked, and this is why it is very important for people to engage with their legislators and advise them. We have the experience, they're lacking the knowledge. It's incumbent upon us as business people or consumers or interested parties to engage them and bring this thing into the best possible fruition it can become. And that's going to take time and effort and money.
So apparently there was some verbiage in here about that stores would be able to receive a special permit. So a special use permit for on-site consumption, which is not ideal because when you go in there, there's not a lot of space to go in and consume. And like Dawn mentioned, there are medical patients who will camp out all day long. Right, so it's not really advantageous for a rec shop to become a consumption lounge. It's just not the right business model, frankly. And so trying to create that separate space that allows for consumption of all types, whether it's vape, edibles, or combustion, those options need to be available. And of course, removing that Class C felony is going to be key. And then offering an outdoor solution to consume joints, which are the #1 product sold in every single legal state. So it's not just Washington. Every single state has a pre-roll that is the #1 product sold. And in fact, on Fridays between the hours of 3 and 5, half of all baskets have one pre-roll. So very, very popular.
You know, a solution there might be not a consumption endorsement, but a sampling endorsement. Maybe by limiting, consider that somebody wants to try the blue dream. Maybe consider, you've seen these little shorties at different places. They are little sample joints. They're enough to give you the taste and the taste of euphoria, and that limits their time on site. But you really to be able to come in and stand at what's effectively a lunch counter and have a quick bite as a comparison compared to sitting down for an 8-course meal. That's going to move people through quicker. It's not going to impact a retail licensee as much as having a consumption lounge would, and all the attendant traffic and parking and other impacts.
Maybe the biggest impact could be the producer, processors, and retailers being a part of that, being able to advertise in an environment like this, being able to give samples is huge. It happens at Costco with samples all the time. It's a way for somebody to understand a product that they may not be comfortable or know. And so to be able to have that safe spot to consume a product is going to be huge. Education is a key component, and being able to educate your consumers in an environment that they can go to with a trusted representative is in every single industry across all sectors. And it's no different with cannabis. So providing a facility, a business where people can give samples, advertise, and conduct business is just normal. And that's exactly what we're trying to do, is normalize and professionalize the cannabis industry. And it all starts with the face. The face is going to be the lounge, if you will. Again, that kind of window into the soul of the community.
As a producer processor, I can say that's one of the biggest topics amongst all the industry, for all tier 1s to tier 3s. There's just little small sample packs to be able to get people to smell, taste, and try our product.
Touch on that more, because you can't smell. Our noses drive decisions. And when you can't go to high-end farms and smell Matt's genius, how are you going to make that decision? Right? Terpenes are what we want. That's what drives the effects. The percentage just gets you there faster. But without smelling the terpenes, how are you going to know what effect you want? Whether it's lavender or a citrus to give you that calming or uplifting feeling, without smelling it, without giving that intimate interaction between your grower at a farmer's market and touching and feeling and sampling, how are you going to make that strategic buying decision?
Yeah, definitely, because at that point, I'm just meeting you for the first time. You have to trust my opinion. I have to sell myself instead of my product. A lot of times people turn down the product if their bud tender hasn't even tried it yet, and they bought a product that may not be like superior or lesser or anything like that, but to the taste buds that they want, I know that I have that product, but they don't trust me at that point because they haven't met me quite prior. So it turns down a lot of sales, it turns down a lot of opportunity to just introduce new flavors. Trying to describe somebody what like a goji OG is super decently about 75% and then like 25% berry on the back of the throat. How do you describe that to somebody without actually having to consume it right there? Because this consumption, the smell, the smell is the most direct nervous systems to the brain. So that triggers the most electricity and the most powerful impact on your decision making. And at the end of the day, that's one of the most driven concepts that we would like to see become an opportunity for a salesman.
And actually, the growers are not doing as well as other segments of the licensee population. To be able to develop our cannabis tourism the way we have with our wineries and distilleries. I went to Ireland and went to Bushmills, and that was fascinating to see the process from start to finish. For somebody that wants to do more than just smoke, they want to become educated, to be able to travel to a production facility and, this is what the seed looks like. These are what starts look like. These are plants and veg. These are plants and flower. This is how we trim. That is a whole experience, and it's much more than just lighting up a joint and tasting it and making a purchase. But after having that educational experience over the course of what it will likely be a couple of hours at least, and if not several hours, to be able to purchase at the end of that, you have educated your palate, you've improved your knowledge base of the plant overall, and it's only could be a win-win for not only the producers, but for those that come and experience that event.
One of the key things I'd love to see beyond lounges is event permitting. I think that offers opportunities for growers, it offers opportunities for individuals that are not part of a licensee to have a raffle or auction off cannabis products. all of this is stuff that can be done for alcohol right now and has special permits at the LCB to do it. But there's nothing like that for cannabis. And so we'd love to see stuff like that because it's really going to enhance the tourism industry. It's going to enhance the process of learning about how this stuff is grown and understanding it. Right now, bed and breakfasts can include alcohol in a reservation. Spas can include serving of beer or wine with one of their treatments there. And I think you could have equivalents like that for cannabis. And you could have cannabis in certainly the lounge settings and the community settings, but also in more casual tourism settings, and be able to accommodate people who are specifically interested in it.
So cannabis cafes or marijuana lounges are the third largest investment vehicle in 2019. And that's important because the economy always follows money. So the first largest investment vehicle is a multi-state operator. That's essentially a real estate investment trust or a REIT, where retailers are buying up multiple and that's garnering a lot of attention with MedMen, for example. The second largest investment vehicle being data with a subset of technology and accurate dosing. And then the third is cannabis cafes or marijuana lounges, which is, again, a play on real estate. And so not a lot of activity in Washington, a little bit in Oregon, but we're starting to see a lot of new bills coming out describing how they should be implemented. Colorado has some pilot programs. Alaska's gone all out and said this is how it's going to work. Las Vegas and then West Hollywood have their own municipalities where they're not waiting for the state. And so West Hollywood's going live in September. They're not waiting for California's bill. San Francisco has a safe injection site that we reviewed for the educational requirement components and some overdose literature. And so there's a lot of push for cannabis cafes. And it's not just for the real estate. It's not just for medical and small business and for minorities, but it's just for the whole legalization. This is really going to be the way to move forward to give that don't have that access, give them the safe access point. If they're an adult care facility or an apartment or otherwise, this is an opportunity for Washington State to do the right thing. They've limited these small businesses enough by limiting out-of-state investors, by not allowing seed to sale, by cutting up the vertical integration opportunities and the limitations. Again, we have the highest sales tax and we have the lowest prices. So think about that when you look at Colorado, whose owners on the retail side are also the ones growing it. They control the prices all of the way. So they have a lower tax rate and yet higher prices. That's not what we're dealing with in Washington. This is a serious business epidemic that could choke and drain a lot of people, like what Washington saw with coffee. It's very analogous to the coffee industry, where Starbucks suppressed the price, pushed out all of these mom and pop businesses. The same thing is going to happen when you have 1,400 registered producer processors. Only 800 of them are active. And when you compare an agricultural crop like tomatoes, that's too many producers. So there will be consolidation. And for those that aren't willing or not wanting to do that, they'll be forced to, and that'll be the next wave, which is going to be capitulation or forced mergers. So that's going to be the next wave. If we can help them out, some of those individuals will be able to survive to that point. Otherwise, they're going to go out of business. So this is essential for small businesses and for our community to thrive and see what's out there, to develop new products. There's been a serious lack of investing, and yet we have the world's third largest winery market, behind California, which is behind, I believe, France in terms of the wine production. And so there's terroir here that has amazing mineral content, Red Mountain specifically. And so offering that opportunity to create the world's best cannabis is there for tourism, for business growth and development and research and all of these things. If we can only just get rid of this felony to create, even if it has to be a private club, just one opportunity is going to help a lot of these businesses that have been stagnant and depressed and forced to give away their businesses. I can't tell you how many times I've seen businesses here in Washington State give away their license in exchange for 6% royalty. Let me just clarify that. In Arizona, they're getting $20 million for licenses. In California, I've seen partial licenses with 4 or 5 other owners get $5 million. And in Washington State, I've seen countless individuals give their license away with the hope of getting 5 to 6% royalties because they can't make any money. It's not fair. Life isn't fair, but we need to provide a platform that is fair. And I believe it all starts with this bill.
Well, something I'd throw onto that is, as we develop this, there are a lot of people that are looking to protect their turf. So in terms of social consumption venues, whether it be a club or maybe out at a growing location, those opportunities should not be selling large amounts equal to what you could get in either concentrates, edibles, or flour from a retailer. But if you present the opportunity to say, this is what we have, go buy it in bulk over there, or become a regular, thank you for driving 200 miles to see us today, and you can, where do you live? Okay, well, your local store that carries our brand is here, here, and here. There needs to be less competition and distrust between all aspects of either production, processing, and retail, and social consumption, and more of a symbiosis where it's complementary to each business.
I think a rising tide here can raise all ships, but that's not what people have experienced so far in Washington's cannabis market, so they're very skeptical of both.
Getting rid of the felony would also create non-licensee opportunities. So, we have bud tenders and all the other ancillary people involved in trade. But when you open social venues, those places have to be staffed. They have to be clean. Ideally, they'll have food service. You're expanding the business of cannabis beyond just cannabis and into more traditional businesses. So I don't know why anybody would not want to allow consumption.
It's 2:30, so I want to wrap up this Illinois review, asking if there's any questions about the Illinois bill or any of the other bills we've covered, including Colorado, New Jersey, Alaska, Las Vegas, Oregon, California, and Illinois.
Am I right? This is the largest engagement of any of the bills?
It is larger than all of the bills, including 502, including Bailey's bill.
Right.
It is bigger than all of them. It is huge.
Lawmakers like that. They like to do things comprehensively, and typically what's happened is legalization's been done by ballot initiative, and then lawmaking bodies have tried to come in and adapt that. And in some cases, they've made wise choices like changing the tax rate on I-502. But in other cases, they work from really old playbooks and stereotypes and assumptions about the cannabis market and about cannabis consumers. And that's typically not beneficial. I'm hoping with what Illinois has put forward, it's as comprehensive as it appears. But even there are still things I think people in Illinois will want to fix, and things here we'd like to emulate.
Well, in the early days of reform, I remember many legislators saying that the perfect is the enemy of the good. That Illinois bill is starting to look like the IRS tax code to me.
All right, we're going to do a little Q&A for those that are online. We're going to do a little Q&A for the last 30 minutes and meet and greet, a little follow-up. So if you've got any questions, the chat window is open. Let us know if you have any comments, questions, concerns, and we will try and get them addressed. So with that concludes the panel, the Q&A, and the Illinois review. And the remaining 30 minutes are going to be used for any follow-up questions that you might have, as well as just kind of a meet and greet. If there's any questions, fire away.
I mentioned Amsterdam earlier. I mentioned Amsterdam in front of a Republican lawmaker this year, and he said, hey, Bailey, free advice. Don't mention Amsterdam in front of people like me. It's never a good example. We don't want to hear about what they're doing. Well, they've had these cafes or these coffee shops for decades. The Dutch population uses marijuana at a lower rate than Europe on average, or America on average. Dutch teens use cannabis at a lower rate than Europe on average, or American teens on average. And Dutch teens also have a lower pregnancy rate than American teens. So I don't know if there's an exact correlation between all of those things, but I would say the people who just knee-jerk assume that a European society with coffee shops has gone to hell in a handbasket and has led to endangered kids and unhealthy people should really look at the evidence. If you care about minimizing supposed harms from cannabis abuse and minimizing youth access to cannabis, maybe you should consider coffee shops, because it is working in Amsterdam.
And Bailey, on that point, when you look at the Amsterdam experience over the many years, they've made changes. It hasn't stayed the same. Initially it was a local thing, word of mouth, and then as people found out about it internationally, it did become a tourist destination. They did have to make some changes to accommodate the local citizenry, because you suddenly had an influx of outsiders that were negatively impacting the otherwise social fabric. And this is, again, it's something that's going to develop. It's nothing is written in stone. There's a lot of paper I see, and paper tends to get recycled and deteriorate. So, but thankfully, the more we know, the more we think, and the more things change, and then the more we learn, and we're able to change things for the better. So, this is a fantastic opportunity. I don't know why there's a resistance to it. These clubs get people out of the public eye. Pardon me, that's from asthma. But one of the greatest complaints I hear from the non-consumption community is I don't like going out in public and smelling it. I don't like exposing myself to possibly getting high when it's not my choice to do so, even though the science for secondhand consumption is really not apparent. But it's a perceived concern. Certainly we shouldn't be out smoking in the wind, and certainly not blowing smoke in anyone's faces. So having consumption sites and venues would do that. It's like a bar. I mean, nobody wants to go and see a group of drunks drinking out of bottles on a street corner. That's why we have bars.
That's what the opening of King of the Hill was for. You want that type of behavior, right. You watch that on repeat, and that's it.
And even there, they were in the back alley.
They were in the back alley, that's right.
And with the Amsterdam Cafe, speaking of revenue, how many parents do you have, children, brothers, sisters, friends that I've grown up, talked about, oh, Amsterdam, we're going to go to Amsterdam, we're going to go check out those cafes. Why send all that money to another country when we can collect that money here in our own state?
I went to Amsterdam last year. I have a legal marijuana store about a quarter mile away from my apartment, but I spent thousands of dollars, my wife and I, traveling to another continent to enjoy smoking cannabis near a canal. And that was pretty much it. And when I'd been there before, I always remembered this mythical great pot in Amsterdam, but now it's not even as good as what I can get here in Washington. What's good about it is I have all these opportunities. We could take a canal ride. We could go see shows. We could go to restaurants, and yes, the coffee shops, and we can smoke at all of them. Or not, but they did want us to buy something. And I think we have the potential for those types of opportunities here. One of the things I love about the buses is I think that's a chill way to get around and see a town. If you've never been in Seattle, it is a beautiful town with all sorts of great hills and views, and a good can of tourism bus lets you enjoy a little bit in between and then get around to these sites and enjoy them in a very traditional tourist way. I like that, but I don't think it should be the only way that someone, who's lived in Seattle for 20 years can consume it.
Right. And traffic's bad enough.
The civil liberties aspect of being able to be an adult and not be able to consume is probably the worst thing that I've encountered. Watching a friend die because he didn't have access to cannabis. I was a registered rep, meaning an investment advisor managing a $650 million fund. I left my job at a very cushy investment firm because this is a passion of mine. This is something that should be legal. This is something I'm moving forward on, and something for 5 years I haven't stopped. Because as an adult, if you see a friend, a relative, even a stranger die because they didn't have access to something they wanted, Marinol is a synthetic cannabis, right? Marinol sucks. My friend did not want to smoke or use Marinol as a pill because it made him lethargic and pass out. That's not how he wanted to end his life. He wanted a joint. It was his choice as an adult to die more comfortably in his own way. And I think that we should be able to offer that to all adults, not just ones that are, in their last mode of life. So civil liberties are important. I think it goes beyond just minorities and small business and medical patients. It's just a human inalienable right where we should be able to grab up a flower and smell it, smoke it, eat it, do whatever we want, whether it's a dandelion, a rose, cannabis, doesn't matter. This is an opportunity for us to kind of bring this to the community and let everybody vote on it and make a decision. But again, it's being a highly regulated industry. We need to be together and informative and not fight that mis or disinformation on things like impaired driving. We can all get on board with that social use aspect that helps small businesses, minorities, and medical patients.
As otherwise law-abiding citizens and residents of a legal area, we shouldn't be in the position of being productive citizens, going to work, being involved in our communities, maybe in Little League or, Kiwanis Club, whatever it may be, and being told, this is legal, but you can only have it at home where nobody can see you. It's counterintuitive. It's not the reform that so many have worked for so many years. We still haven't achieved the vision of reform that we want and expect and won't quit until we get. There's a lot of important issues that happen in whatever capital you're at, or even in whatever city hall or county chamber that you're in. And the sooner that we can move towards making cannabis regular and normal in society, the sooner we can take this off the table and focus on other important issues.
Cannabis isn't always as important as roads and hospitals and schools. But after so many years of getting the shaft when it comes to legislating it and when it comes to making policy decisions, it has now become as important as a lot of those other issues. And so I would encourage people that are interested in this not to fear that it's trivial, not to fear that it's something that, we can only bring up once we've fixed every other social problem that we can identify, and then maybe then you'll get your cafes. They'll always say that. That will always be an excuse. And the problems created by cannabis prohibition don't just go away because it's legal for some adults to have it sometimes. This is a long process and a long road that we find ourselves on as far as fixing this particular issue. We believe we see a light and a next step here around cannabis lounges.
And things are going to continue to be difficult until the federal prohibition ends. I mean, we just need to look north to Canada to see what legalizing nationwide has done for Canada. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police, Canada's national police, to me famously, I don't know if anybody knows it, but they actually issued a press release to the public saying, stop calling us about your neighbors. It's legal now. We are not going to come out because you don't like it. If you don't like it, talk to your legislature or legislators and get them to make the incremental changes that are necessary to balance out the situation. But until that time, and I'm going beyond what they said. Basically, they just said, stop calling us, we're not coming. But the overreaching thing is that fine-tuning is going to go on for years to come. And when it's finally legal nationally, and you can get it everywhere, and it becomes more regular, it'll take some of the tension off of the legislators, and they'll be more willing to go, okay, well, you know, you can go drink till 2 a.m. I guess you can go out and, you know, consume cannabis until midnight at a club or other things. But
it's quarter till. Does anybody have any last questions or comments before we wrap this up? And
lighten the mood, I'm going to leave it with a little quote from Mr. Robert Nesta Marley and just say, brothers, you're right, you're right, you're right, you're right, you're so right.
So with that, we're going to roll this one up. I'm Josh Kincaid, chair of the Marijuana Lounge Committee with the Cannabis Alliance, a lobbyist group in Seattle. I want to thank you for all your participants. I want to thank my guests. We've got Devin with Weed Maps, Levi with Lion Pride Music, Matt with High End Farms. There's Bailey representing Normal, and then Dawn representing everybody, including the Northwest Cannabis Club in Portland, Oregon. All committee members on the Marijuana Lounge with the Cannabis Alliance, again, a lobbyist group in Seattle. I want to thank the participation. I want to thank everybody in the audience who came, as well as those that were online. Let me know if you got any questions. You can be reached. My email is josh@thetalkinghedge.com.
And Josh, I'd like to throw out a shout out for Homegrown in Washington State. We're putting together a website right now that will be active soon at homegrownwashington.com and .org. But right now, anyone can get involved on Facebook. There is a Homegrown Washington Facebook page. If you look up there, so it's a welcome to. We'd love to have you.
And big shout out to Green Lady Shop, CBD shop. So until the next time, we're going to have a couple other meetings. In 2 weeks, we'll have another meeting with a town hall when we discuss Maryland's bill, right? Or is it Massachusetts? I'll have to check my notes. I think it's Massachusetts bill. We'll check that out in 2 weeks, and we're going to do that from North End in Marysville when we do North Washington. 2 weeks after that, we'll be in Ellensburg, Central Washington, followed by Spokane, which is Eastern Washington. 2 weeks after that, and then all the way back to Seattle, October 2nd. So stay tuned. If we're in your area, stop by, and we will see you then. Thanks again.
Thank you,
guys.